Welcome into a football show, Monday morning free agency edition, filling in for Braden Gall, who has seemingly jumped ship right before the beginning of the new NFL year. It is I from the Hot Read podcast, JT Ruhnke, joined as always on a football show by Paul Kuharsky of paulkuharsky.com. Paul, how are you doing, my friend, here on the beginning of free agency 2025 edition as we get into what the Titans are doing, including a big signing that they made just about an hour ago?
Look at you. Look at you in the hot seat. I'm well. I know people have a lot of questions about Dan Moore. Not signed till Wednesday, obviously, but they've got a deal in place. And, I understand people see fault because statistically over the last 4 years, he's not been spectacular. So I'll lead off here by saying the league opinion is he played his best ball in his fourth year and that he's a riser, if you will. Out of what's out there, he was probably the best. I know the Titans had interest in Jalen Moore, who quickly signed, jumped from San Francisco to Kansas City. Didn't have a lot of starting experience, so he would be on the other side of that, playing behind Trent Williams. I think he only had 10 starts. Also kind of viewed as a riser, and I think got good money for that. So look, Dan Moore's the guy they wanted. They're not going to spend a high draft pick now on left tackle. I think he may be a left tackle who pushes J.C. Latham to the other side. Haven't gotten definitive word on that, and they may not know. They may come into camp not knowing. But here's the thing I don't want to hear, and here's the second piece that I'll write about this. None of this like, oh, he needs time to get used to Bill Callahan or any of that. This is not a young Skoronski or a young Latham thing. Day one has to play well and like a veteran in this thing, wherever he is. And now they're down to one question mark on that line as far as I'm concerned, which is right guard.
Yep, that they fill one need, whether it is on the right side or moving JC to the right side. It's an interesting discussion on how they want to address that. But overall, it seems that the Titans have taken care of two positions and solidified those with a hefty deal here. We are sponsored by Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue here on the show. Some of the best to do it in East Nashville for all your beer, spirit, and wine needs. Head on over to Sinkers, and then some of the best barbecue in town, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue over in East Nashville. Thank you for sponsoring the show. So yes, like you said, Dan Moore, a 4-year player for the Pittsburgh Steelers, a former fourth-round draft pick by the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is signed to a 4-year, $82 million deal with $50 million guaranteed. The big thing to me that we can discuss here, like you said, it has to work out wherever he plays, right, left, either one. It has to work out for the Titans because they're guaranteeing him $31 million in year one. But that is a 20.5 AAV over the entire life of the contract, which is in line of where reports were this morning that Dan Moore, the market is heating up for him, and he could look to get around $20-ish million AAV. Quick, before we move on to more about Dan Moore, it was also reported that this deal was negotiated by not Mike Borgonzi, but the president of football operations, Chad Brinker, on this deal. PK, your thoughts on that? How much does that really matter to you, given that we had a whole debacle about, who has final say over the roster, who makes the decisions? Mike Borgonzi will be in charge of free agency, yet this deal is reported by Adam Schefter that it was done between Dan Moore's agent and Chad Brinker. What does this all mean? Does that move the needle for you at all in terms of what we thought we knew about this Titans front office structure?
I don't think so, really. And I think maybe we got to get past that. I mean, I think the chief negotiator in the L'Jarius Sneed trade last year was Chad Brinker. And I don't know that Chad Brinker was we don't know if Chad Brinker was all the way aboard that or not, right? I mean, he said he had responsibility but not authority. Now, I think that the number one football voice, maybe people think I'm naive on this, but I think Brinker was doing some things last year. I don't want to say at Rand Carthon's behest, but he didn't have technically, but publicly, the authority to overrule Carthon. Carthon was in charge of personnel. I do think that the Titans were trying to give Rand Carthon the opportunity to run the personnel side of things, and that I think he largely did run the personnel side of things. And I am not as down on Rand Carthon's personnel side of things as many people are, though I was more down on Rand Carthon than most people were for a variety of reasons. But I don't think, my impression is Brinker, Borgonzi, McKenzie, and Zeitler are a 4-pack right now, that they are, after those 7:30 in the morning till 7:30 at night meetings that everybody was in, the 4 of them were hanging out and making decisions or picking up where the conversation ended and finalizing things or doing whatever they felt was necessary. And as they did those things, I don't think then it matters who the representative is of the 4 of them. And this was similar with Carthon. The reason that Brinker was the final negotiator in the Snead deal was because he knew Borgonzi, ironically. And so he and Borgonzi, neither of them, the general managers of their respective teams, negotiated that deal. So there's probably some sort of connection here with he and Dan Moore's representative or something like that he did it. I don't know that him doing the first deal in this period where a ton of deals are going to be done tells us anything or means anything.
Yeah, and it also, I tend to agree with you on that. It also is important to note that Shedeur Sanders has his 30 visit today with the Titans. So most likely, with free agency kind of coinciding with that, someone has to be in the room with a guy like Shedeur as they try to figure out what they do with the first overall pick. But more on Dan Moore here. You talked about where he may end up playing for this team in 2025. You look at 2024 where, you said people around the league have this idea that was some of his best work that he's put at the NFL level. Over 1,100 snaps at left tackle last year, played in 17 regular season games where he gave up 41 pressures, 12 sacks, 3 quarterback hits, and 26 quarterback hurries. So, when you look at it from that perspective and you look at the $31 million guaranteed, you have to think that at least somebody in the building, like Bill Callahan, like Chad Brinker, like Mike Borgonzi, as Ed Henry says here in the chat, feels like this is an upside bet that they can work with him, get the best out of him. And for my money's worth, I don't think you're paying a guy 4 years, $82 million with $50 million guaranteed to move him, who was a 4-time starter at left tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers in his career here in those 4 years. You're not moving him to right tackle, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think that's not the case. Well, going back to the negotiating thing, just one final thought there. At this combine, I felt a little bit more exposed than ever to the degree to which teams pre-negotiate ahead of this pre-negotiating period. I don't like this legal tampering title. I think it's stupid. I would call it pre-free agency. And I think there's a lot more, and I consider myself a rather seasoned veteran. I mean, I understand how things work in the league. I don't think I really understood the extent to which teams are really talking to agents at the combine. And I mean, I'm not saying they're doing it out in the open, but there are meetings going on. I mean, outright meetings. I've got a meeting at 2:00 with such and such an agent. Not just me. Me and my negotiating people have a meeting with this agent at this time that we scheduled, well before the combine, or at least before the combine. This isn't on a whim. Like, hey, I ran into him in the hallway and we said, hey, let's get together at 5, wherever. I mean, I got the sense that things are really more plotted out than I ever really thought. That's me being naive, maybe. But the pre-negotiating period is really business is in action in Indianapolis in a way that I was naive to. And so, any of these deals that are going down today, just the same way that we always say, when the 2 years that this pre-negotiating period was like a delicate tiptoe, you really are starting at 11 o'clock Central to talk, that was legitimate. Now there's no legitimate start to it. People are talking throughout. It's just the way it is. And I don't think there's really it doesn't really matter, right? They're all headed towards free agency. I mean, if he's your free agent, that's the only time it matters. Like, you really want to, if he's your free agent and you're negotiating with him, that's the only time it matters in terms of you having some exclusivity.
Yeah, I agree there with you. I mean, you looked at all the deals yesterday, with the trades and whatnot. It's like there really is no rhyme or reason to it. So why we call it a legal tampering period when the tampering has already been done, and this is just time to announce it before the announcement is official. It is pretty silly. I will say, you look at those with the 17 games and the 41 overall pressures, there is a legitimate claim to say, going from a division like he did play in with teams like Cleveland and Cincinnati and Baltimore, that is a division where you're going up against some of the best, whether it be Trey Hendrickson or Myles Garrett. I saw a stat earlier today from Sam Monson, who formerly of PFF, where he said Dan Moore's career numbers against Myles Garrett versus the rest of the NFL. His PFF pass protection grade against the rest of the NFL is around an average of 66 versus a 21 when he goes up against Garrett. His pressure rate is 10.5% against a guy like Myles Garrett versus 7.1% against the rest of the league. Sacks allowed. He's allowed 7 sacks to 27 against the rest of the league. Essentially, Myles Garrett is someone who makes those stats look a little bit inflated against a guy like Dan Moore. Now, the fact that I believe Cleveland is on the schedule this year for the Titans in 2025 is something to watch. But you look at what he was able to do in the pass protection game last year, a 92.5% pass rush win rate, according to PFF. Definitely better in the pass game than he is against the run in the run game. Just a 76.2%, which was around the same exact grade ranking to where maybe a guy like J.C. Latham was last year. I think J.C. Latham was like 28th, and that comes via True Media. So it still stands to reason that this is an upgrade for both sides of the line. Moving a guy like J.C. Latham over to right, solidifying that side somewhere where he's had more recent familiarity in terms of his overall career playing at Alabama, something where he was coming out potentially as a right tackle in the 2024 draft. Now he moves back there. Whether that kind of shakes up his rhythm is yet to be seen. But I think when you look at what Dan Moore has done, he is going to be the left tackle of this team for my money's worth. And I think this is a bet for Bill Callahan to say, this is where we finally get it right, in my opinion. And they have to. You're paying him, you're paying Lloyd Cushenberry. You're going to have to either go out and get a guard in the 4th-ish round or find another guy. Like, you are paying a premium to get this decision right on the offensive line here, and it better work because it's a lot of money. Even though the cap continues to rise, you're spending a lot of money to hopefully finally get it right. On Pete
Prisco put out a tweet yesterday when Twitter was working that the guard market was going to be massive. The prices in the guard market. So that's good news for Peter Skoronski in a couple of years. Yeah. It's not good news for the Titans now as they look to fill that other spot. Excuse me. Here's the other thing about Dan Moore, and I think people are being a little ridiculous, like thinking the Titans are going to go from horrific to all-star level. I don't think you're getting all-star level on the free market now, and I think they've got to go veteran. He scored, I'm not a huge PFF guy, but PFF is a place where you can do some legitimate comparisons of offensive linemen. He was 20.7 points better overall and 24.1 points better in pass blocking last year than Nicholas Petit-Frere. I mean, that's exactly what we're looking for, right? A guy who's significantly better than Nicholas Petit-Frere. And Moore's 26. All right. So you're going from awful to, significantly better than awful. And, do they overpay for that? Well, you're at a point where you have to overpay for that to guarantee it. Now, here's a downside to me, JT. We're very casually, and I think everybody's going to do this, saying, well, they get this guy and they move JT to the right and they're better. That means they spent a damn first-round pick on a guard and a right tackle in consecutive years.
Yep.
That, to me, is not economical drafting, right? Left tackle's the primo spot. And now you just got, conceivably, your left tackle in free agency. Moving your highly regarded, quote-unquote, left tackle to right tackle. Now, right tackle, very important position. And it's become increasingly important. But we're all going to say left tackle is at least a notch more important. And do you want to draft a right tackle 7th overall? Do you want to draft a left guard 11th overall when you have 7 and 11 in consecutive years? That's why they need this year, ideally, to turn one into more than one, and with more than one, attack, quote unquote, more important, more valuable positions. Edge rusher, receiver, quarterback. I leave quarterback out because I'm still on the presumptive side that they're not going that direction, and leaving that out. Then you've got to talk about edge rusher and wide receiver positions that they've not done enough with and not had enough impact, largely because they've been chasing offensive line for so long.
Yeah. And the question is fair to people in the chat here. Is this considered an overpay? $31 million for one, essentially, if you're looking at it a year by year, $31 million this year to play left tackle for the Tennessee Titans. When you compare it to other deals that have gone down either today or yesterday, you look at what the Patriots paid for Morgan Moses, who is very significantly older, which is fair, but gets a 3-year, $24 million deal that can go up to 28.5. So, you're paying significantly less money, maybe more veteran experience for a guy who only gave up 2 sacks last year for the Jets, but he goes off the market for that. And then Ronnie Stanley, another guy who could have maybe moved off from his former team, the Ravens, gets a 3-year, $60 million deal. So similar AAV to what a guy like Dan Moore got, but only $44 million guaranteed. Obviously, he doesn't hit the market, but when you say, when you're looking at that Ronnie Stanley versus Laramie Tunsil production there in the range of that, does getting this position finally right for the Titans merit that kind of overpay? I would continue to believe that it is an overpay, and if they do, if it ends up working out, I think it's fine in the end. But like you said, you're overpaying for this left tackle. Now, because of him presumptuously playing that left tackle position, you now take a guard and a right tackle with your first overall picks the last 2 years. Like, if it does not work this time, it is a massive failure on all fronts for the Tennessee Titans over the last 3 years. But I do think that at the end of the day, when you're looking at this offensive line now with a guy like Dan Moore, Peter Skoronski, Lloyd Cushenberry, and JC Latham ultimately probably moving over to the right side, it is a, by and large, big improvement to what they had last year.
And to Dalen Bills here in the comments, he said, "Of course it's an overpay. Welcome to free agency," and he's right, especially in this first week between now and Friday. Virtually anybody you're signing between now and Friday, agreeing to terms with, and then a Wednesday afternoon signing. That's how it works. I mean, these guys get overvalued. Teams need one. They're one piece away from a championship, or they're one piece away from fixing a unit, or they're desperate to fix a unit, or there's too much for them to fix in the draft. Raise your hand, Tennessee Titans, and they need to do it, and they've got cap room, and I'm not going to lament them spending it if it gets them along the road. And we're not going to know how far this gets them. We're not going to be able to pass initial judgment on Dan Moore really until week 3 or week 4. I'm not waiting that long. Because what I said, because this has to be instant impact. This is not a thing where we're talking to him after 3 bad weeks and he's saying, well, it's going to take me some time to adjust to Bill Count. If it's that, then I think, I don't know what their alternatives were, but then Bill Callahan's making it too hard, or the system changes too hard, or whatever. It's not adaptable enough, because we've seen him more quickly with guys in his previous stops get better results, and the jumps they need to make at positions where they're going to bring people in, multiple people. And let's just say right up top, the lines, or the front on defense, and the offensive line on offense. We both expect they're going to add significant people to that. They're going to add at least 3 people on the offensive line, right? There's still a guard to come, and I think still a swing person to come. And I think there have to be at least 2 edge rushers. And if there's not quick impact from these people, they're not picking them well enough.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to the next conversation. Now that the line is somewhat fixed, what does this mean in terms of who they're protecting when it comes to the quarterback? With breaking news just breaking here that Sam Darnold has indeed agreed to a contract with the Seattle Seahawks. So that means the dream is dead for all of those who thought Sam Darnold to the Titans could be an option.
How hot were you on that?
How hot was I? Listen, I have had quite a couple conversations about where I stand on the quarterbacks. I thought that he could have been a potential fit if it were. Where I ultimately landed on it was if the Titans were to sign him to maybe a 3-year deal with the guaranteed money in the first 2 years, with essentially the ability to let him go after that second year for around $30 to $35 million here, I think I would have been on board with that. Now it depends what Seattle is. I think that all changed.
3 years and 100 with Seattle.
So $55 million guaranteed. So yeah, I mean, you're looking around what the 33 and a half AAV around there, 110 million. So yeah, you're not looking at more than like 35, 36 on that one there. With 50 million guaranteed. I would have done that if you gave me the option. 3 years, 50 million guaranteed. They have an opt-out after the first 2 years, essentially. What I was saying I'd be comfortable with. Now, does that mean that the Titans are now shifting their attention all the way to a rookie quarterback? No. I've been in the small minority, I think, with you, that they would do better to build up this roster for a more attractive quarterback class coming down the line, with taking a guy like Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, or trading back and taking one of those guys at 3, and then kind of just figuring it out this year, whether that is a quarterback like at the time Sam Darnold, who is now off. But I think you have also been on board with the idea of bringing in a guy like Mac Jones, or they've been tied to Zach Wilson recently, a guy to bring in and compete with Will Levis. Ultimately, I do think that as we get more and more and we get closer to the draft and we get through this free agency, I think they are more content to take a quarterback at 1. But I think we still have a long way to go. But that's where I stand with the quarterbacks, at least.
Yeah, I wouldn't be that upset about losing out on Darnold. Now, look, maybe Darnold is on a Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield track, and that really good year was the first good year of a good career. I don't know that the Seahawks are assuredly better. They're younger, but I don't know that they're assuredly better than they were with Geno. But no, I wouldn't cry out on missing this guy. I think put him on a bad team like the Titans again, and he tends to be a turnover machine. And I think you'd see a lot of the same stuff you saw with Will Levis. So if they're going to be patient and stopgap it here, as long as they're aggressively trying to fix the rest of the roster and kind of by what they do at quarterback, declaring that they're looking for a quarterback in next year's draft, I can accept that. I suspect that's where they're going to wind up. I mean, there's not much left on the quarterback train that's real exciting. I mean, all of these guys are old and washed up to a degree, and expensive for a stopgap. Not that paying $30 million for a quarterback is outlandish by any means, but you can bank that money or pay it to somebody else and have a rookie deal next year with somebody that's more promising. And I understand there's no like clear cut guy for next year, but there are 7 or 8 guys, and you have to think out of a college football season, several guys are going to emerge. I think it's rare that we've seen back-to-back really bad quarterback classes.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think Dalen brings up Zach Wilson, who it's not nothing that, Buck Rising over on 104.5 has said that they've been very, very closely attached to guys like Mac Jones and Zach Wilson.
I've said Mac Jones, and I've said Jameis Winston
as well. They've been closely connected to. You saw the Broncos re-sign Jared Stidham, which means they look to be passing on Zach Wilson. The Jaguars also just signed Nick Mullins about 15 minutes ago, which seems to look like they're moving on from Mac Jones.
Well, so I would say I think they know Mac Jones is going to get a better opportunity, right? Yeah. Denver knows that Zach Wilson's going to get a better opportunity. They both have quarterbacks that should be playing all 17 games, barring injury, and those guys are going to get better opportunities. Zach Wilson, I started mentioning midseason last year, like if you're looking for the guy who's going to be the next Darnold, the next Geno, the next Baker, well, Zach Wilson would probably be at the head of the line. Had bad experience with a bad team, went and sat in a good situation with a good coach, with a good offense in Sean Payton. Now, does that make him good? No. Does that mean he's got a chance? Like, there's been some invisibility there and him working behind the scenes. And so if you're looking for a reclamation project who, we've all had a blindfold on in terms of what he's been doing, he's not going to break the bank by any means. It could be a pleasant surprise. It could be a 0. You roll the dice on a guy like that and pair him with Will Levis and think you get 17 starts out of those 2 guys in a middling season while you're, maybe you luck out, but more likely you're drafting a quarterback next year. I think there are worse approaches.
Yeah, I agree with you there, which is, I think going the stopgap route is, especially if you're paying a guy like Dan Moore and you still only have 2 top 100 picks here. And if you don't go with the stopgap option, right, you're going with a guy at 1, presumably, which most likely is all for all intents and purposes, it looks to be going towards Cam Ward if the Titans were to select a quarterback at 1, which leaves you with the 35th pick. And I know that there could be some intriguing options for wide receiver, for edge rushers there, but as we've heard this offseason, there is a need here for the Titans to get more top 100 picks, get more picks in general. And Joe says here in the chat, it feels like this was a move to stay at 1. That's how I originally saw it, building up this offensive line to protect your quarterback of the future. But I think it definitely opens up the possibility to trade back at 35 because of, signing a guy like Dan Moore to that big of a contract with that money and still having a lot of different holes to fill in terms of edge rusher, linebacker, safety, the guard position. What do they do at wide receiver? You need to get younger as well at the same time. And it feels like, to me, this continues to drive them into the reality that they have to trade back at some point at 1 or 35. I think it's at 35 at this point, but we will have to see. Now,
I don't think it tells us a thing about 1. I mean, they had to fill some needs in free agency, and they filled one in free agency. So the fact that they don't need a left tackle anymore changes something about their plan at 1. I mean, a trade down where they could still help themselves address edge twice, receiver, safety, inside linebacker, every other position on the roster except running back, which you're hearing they want a big running back, and cornerback, unless it's Travis Hunter. I don't see how this has any impact on 1. It lessens one need out of a slew of needs. No, I don't think this tells us anything about their plans with 1.
I think it could set up, it signals at least that you could set up a quarterback for success, more success. Now, whether that is the quarterback at 1, which it also combined with us not hearing anything at all on the quarterback front when teams like the Jets, Giants, Seattle, Pittsburgh, Minnesota now, who looks to be maybe going J.J. McCarthy or Aaron Rodgers, the Colts even being linked to Daniel Jones. All these other teams have been linked to a quarterback in one way or another, with the Titans continuing to stay silent.
Yeah, silent.
It's not nothing that they seem to be gearing up to protect on the offensive line for their quarterback of the future. Now, if this is, we also know that Mike Borgonzi seems like a guy who is a steel curtain. Nothing is going to really get out from where they are in the St. Thomas, Ascension St. Thomas Sports Park. It seems like that is a closed off building this time of year in terms of national reports. However, I think I'm with you that if I was still given the option between a Jameis Winston, a Mac Jones, a Zach Wilson, as Dalen says here in the comment section, if he plays well, then you have a great problem on your hands next year. If he sucks, it's just a stopgap. You acquire more picks, whether that is a trade down in the first or in the second to build this team. At least you have one of the bigger problems on your roster now fixed as well, which seemingly seems to be the offensive line.
That's the right view. Look at Jason McDonald up here about Darnold. I think this is an important point too. It's not for nothing that it's his 4th stop. The fact that the Vikings let him walk in favor of a guy they'd never seen play a game is something. And the Vikings at that price, like I thought if his price was relatively low, that he'd land back with the Vikings. Obviously, he's got more freedom without somebody looking over his shoulder. And the Vikings are eager to see the 11th pick in last year's draft come to fruition. They've got a lot of faith in him, obviously. But I tend to agree with you. Like, they're letting him walk for not a heck of a lot, where they could say, hey, come back, keep doing what you're doing. We'll wait on our pick. We'll just let him sit the way Green Bay let Love sit, because things are going pretty damn well until our last 2 games. Let's do it again. And they weren't inclined to say that at all. There's no hint of it, right? That says something about a guy if he's so great.
At the same time, whether it was with the Vikings or Sam Darnold or the scheme, like, you win 14 games. I do think also taking J.J. McCarthy as high as they did tells you that like, at least the clock starts ticking on that organization when you use a 1st-round pick like that sooner rather than later. And I think that's not nothing as well. But I do agree with you that it does say that if it works so well for Kevin O'Connell's team, why move on now? It is a fair point. Sinkers Beverages, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue, some of the best to do it in the East Nashville area. If you need, all your fixins for if you're hankering for barbecue or just need supplies for gatherings or parties, they simply have the best options. Sinkers Beverages, of course, is a 4-time Best of Nashville liquor store of the year, and for good reason, because they have an unbeatable selection of beer, wine, and spirits. Also, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue, some of my favorite barbecue in the Nashville area. I know, Paul, that you may have differing opinions because
it's very good. There's allowed to be more than one good barbecue place.
This is very true. They also, when the time comes around, whether it is for the Super Bowl or Thanksgiving or events like that, their catering is unmatched. I know I used them this past Thanksgiving. Their smoked brisket, unbelievable. Got to check them out over there. And you can find out more at www.sgwilliesbarbecue.com. Thank you to them for sponsoring the show here. I think this moves the conversation to what still needs to be done for the Titans. The counter is now up to 2 free agents signed, with Dan Moore on his 4-year deal. And of course, earlier today, like clockwork, they bring back Morgan Cox on his 1-year deal. Where should the attention now turn with Sam Darnold off the market, with seemingly their offensive line in a better spot than it was this morning? Where do they turn? And of course, you have some big names still on the board. Josh Sweat, the edge rusher. We saw Hassan Reddick come off the board. We saw Javon Hargrave come off the board earlier today already. Is that where they should turn their attention to? There's still a lot of off-ball linebackers that are still out there in terms of depth. That they need to address there, or do they start to focus on this quarterback as they start to come off the board? Is Darnold the first domino here? I'm of the opinion that I think their next big target will, either be Javon Holland, the safety who they've been connected to, or I think they do need to address the edge position sooner than later.
I think their edges are probably a little bit further down the pecking order. I don't want to spill the names I have because I'm reserving them for members. So I encourage you to go to paulkuharsky.com. I had more and more. So if you want some other names that I feel pretty confident about them chasing, I encourage you to go there and read. In terms of the positional pecking order, I think they feel really good about the class of edge rushers in the draft. So if they came away with nothing or very little there, and I think maybe there's a young guy who wouldn't cost a fortune that they could add there, who'd be a second, or maybe like ideally Arden would be a third. This guy could maybe compete with Arden for 2/3. That would be an ideal situation. I mean, the other position, I'm setting quarterback aside in all of this. The other position is receiver. And I've long said, like, I think a Josh Palmer would be a nice fit in this offense. Well, Josh Palmer is right there in like average yards per target, I think, at a tick behind Calvin Ridley. So if you put those two guys on the field together, you would really, I think, be keeping some defenses honest in terms of having to play your safeties with depth, right? Which helps Tony Pollard, which helps everything. But how are you selling? This is kind of the complicated thing, right? We're talking about a lot of quarterbacks are going to have to sift out before they do their veteran thing, if they're going the direction we think they are. And if they, in fact, are, how are you selling Josh Palmer? Like a receiver is going to want to know who his quarterback is. And you're saying either you're telling him it's Cam Ward, or you're telling him, we're stopgapping it this year. Maybe Jameis Winston. Oh, I'm excited by that. He throws a lot of touchdowns. Maybe Mac Jones. Oh, that guy's got no arm. It's not going to match with me. I'd like to, catch balls deep, and he can't throw balls deep. Maybe Zach Wilson. Oh, damn, I have no idea what that guy has. I didn't see him play last year. I think it's a tough sales pitch, and you know how you win those sales pitches is show them the money. And I think there's probably a decent market for Palmer. There's just all these old guys on the market ahead of him that are going to probably outrank him in money, if not length of deal. And so we'll see how that all shifts out. But to me, it'd be really good if they could find themselves a receiver. And it's probably not going to be their number 2 guy. It's probably going to be their number 3 guy. I think number 2 guy or number 1 guy ideally would come in the draft. But there are some quality number 3 guys. I think Nick Westbrook-Akine, if he is able to convert 9 touchdowns and 32 or 36 catches into a market for himself, it's going to not wind up being here. I think the Titans know what he is and know that was a lovely, fantastic coincidence that those passes were allowed him to run into the end zone or were thrown into the end zone. But, that's a fluky thing. I think you come back to the mean there, and he'd be a great guy to have on your roster at a certain amount of money. But if somebody's going to pay him like he's a major touchdown scorer, it's not going to be the Titans.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said if they did not get a deal done before the tampering period was began, I think the chances that he would be back with the team would dwindle dramatically, in my opinion. I think 9 touchdowns, considering a guy like Tutu Atwell got a 1-year, $10 million deal. Hollywood Brown got, around $8 million guaranteed on his deal with incentives for the Chiefs. Someone's going to be interested in a guy like NWI, who deservingly so has bought himself the opportunity to go with his production, to go out and find a suitable contract that reflects those numbers. I'm with you that I think
I've come to love NWI.
Me
but
too.
they need more. They need more separation than he offers.
Yes,
they do, and that's part of fixing that group. If he's there, he's got to be your 4, your 3.5, and I think it's okay that he thinks he's more than that. That's part of what makes him so likable.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think I also agree with this idea that for a lot of these top wide receivers on the market, it's a hard sell. And for a lot of these veterans, I think a lot of them are fool's gold anyways, guys who are past their prime, who I don't think could offer much for the Titans. We saw probably the only wide receiver really worth a decent chunk of change, Chris Godwin, go off the market very, very early. I'm with you in the boat that they should be targeting guys like Josh Palmer's, maybe a guy like Mac Hollins. Find role players in free agency that are not going to break the bank. See what you can find in young guys like a Greg Dortch, a Rondale Moore, an Elijah Moore. These role players that could slot into an offense. Maybe a guy like Olamide Zaccheaus. Some of these, I know De'Ami Brown's name has been thrown around as well. Like, these are guys who realistically you're going to find in the wide receiver market that, you're probably not, you're going to pay them maybe a little bit more to come here, but you're not going to break the bank, and they're going to play a role in this offense come day one. Now, they still do need to find a dynamic either wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1. I think that comes in terms of the draft. Where that exactly is yet to be determined. However, I don't think we can expect to see any big names out of the wide receiver position here in terms of big, like, household names from this free agent class. Another quarterback.
Let me ask you about one guy there, just before we're done with wide receivers. If they got somebody like Josh Palmer, say, and so he's your 3. So you got Ridley and Josh Palmer. What if you drafted somebody like Jack Besh, who's not, singularly dynamic, but he's a do everything right guy, crafty as hell, right? Finds ways to get open. It's not the most dynamic group of guys. But
I think it gets the job done. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think of those 3 as a 3-pack?
I would be very okay with that. It all depends, right? Because Jack Besh has certainly made himself a market where you'd probably have to use the 35th overall pick on him in the second round there. Now, if that is like maybe a quarterback at 1 and Jack Besh at 2, does that set the Titans as a team overall up for success? Maybe not. However, I think the idea is there that you bring in a more slot only, do it all gadgety type of guy that can play all over the field in Jack Besh, or the Iowa State prospect, Jalen Knoll, who I know that they have seemingly had interest in as well. If you were able to get another day 2 pick, same type of thing where Josh Palmer becomes that X sort of receiver in your offense like NWI was. The Calvin Ridley continues to play his Z role, and then you bring in a dynamic slot shifty guy like a Jack Besh or Jalen Knoll. I'm totally on board. It's not the biggest name, sexiest wide receiver core, but I don't think you need it to be next year, as this team is still in a rebuild. That I'm on board with that totally. Now, another quarterback has come off the board here. The Jets signing Justin Fields. They were linked to him very, very intensely, and they get a deal done. 2-year deal, $40 million. That includes $30 million guaranteed with the Jets. So that takes Sam Darnold and Justin Fields off the list. I was always a proponent that Justin Fields never made sense for the Titans. I know people continue to ask me thoughts about that, but just in terms of the scheme that Brian Callahan runs, I don't think Justin Fields would have ever been a fit. For $15 million guaranteed every year. I mean, I don't hate the contract. That it's a buy low position here for the Jets to see what they can do with a guy like Justin Fields. But it also shows that as these dominoes are going to start falling pretty quickly, and I think we probably see a guy like Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers head off next as these dominoes continue to fall. Looks like we're down to the Titans, Giants, Pittsburgh, as the 3. And I think Eddie brings up a question here where if we're following this rumor trail, like the Jets and Fields were linked, the Seahawks and Darnold were linked, if Rodgers to the Steelers rumors are truly legit, how desperate does that make a team like the Giants to go for one? And does that make the Titans' decision to be pretty quiet on the quarterback front? Does that help them out in this trade up situation to go from 3 to 1?
It seems like the Giants are pretty intent on a veteran. Now, that doesn't mean they wouldn't draft a kid, but I think it spins them back into the Aaron Rodgers market. And who else? Russell Wilson. I think Aaron Rodgers, if the Steelers are interested in him, that would be the marriage. I would think. I think Justin Fields, you really have to build your offense around him. Like, I understand playing to a quarterback's strength. But to me, Justin Fields, you have to change too much, right? Your offense has to be all about him. And I don't know that he's good enough for me to want to do that. But, maybe. Who's the Jets coordinator now? That's slipping my mind.
It's a good question. It's not Nathaniel Hackett or Todd Downing anymore. That's for sure. I did see that you just tweeted, however, that the plan is for Dan Moore. It's Tanner Engstrand, who.
That doesn't help me a lot, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it doesn't either for me. He was the passing game coordinator for the Lions last season, so he followed Aaron Glenn there. You did report that Dan Moore, the plan is to move J.C. Latham back to right tackle. So I know there were some questions about what about the Titans standing by Latham, saying he's our future at left tackle. I mean, that wasn't set in stone. We heard from Brian Callahan at the NFL Combine that there was always a reality that J.C. Latham could find himself moving back to right tackle. It looks like that is their plan of attack now, finally getting the right tackle woes are gone, because I do think J.C. Latham, as well as he played last year, I think that fits the need there. I think it opens up a possibility for there to be trouble at left tackle, but like we talked about earlier, it's a solid option for the Titans now at going into 2025.
Yeah, look, they're better today than they were yesterday. And there was no chance Nicholas Petit-Frere was back to play right tackle, but J.C. Latham over Nicholas Petit-Frere is a substantial upgrade with substantial upside.
Yeah, I agree there. Outside of wide receiver, there is there a conversation to be had for the Titans to look deeper into the middle linebacker position in free agency than address it through the draft? There are still, for my money's worth, a lot of good options out there that may come around not be just cheap stopgap options, but guys like EJ Speed, guys like Dre Greenlaw, guys like Isaiah Simmons that the Titans could potentially want to pair with Kenneth Murray as a better, more suitable coverage option there at the middle linebacker position. Is that something that you could see the Titans end up doing here as we get deeper into free agency?
I think it depends on money. I mean, I think if the very best inside linebackers were free, I think they'd change their attitude about what they'd pay an inside linebacker. But unless you've got a very clear 3-down inside linebacker who is equally adept at dropping into coverage and coming forward and making plays in the run game, I don't think this regime believes in spending money on inside linebackers. And I tend to lean that way as well. Now, I'm probably trained that way because I've covered this team forever, and this team hasn't paid inside linebackers. It hasn't had sterling 3-down inside linebackers or middle linebacker when it was a 3-4, when it was a 4-3. And I thought they were on a good track for a while there when they had Avery Williamson, and I thought they got better with Jayon Brown and conceivably better with David Long when he was on the field. And those guys were not necessarily every down linebackers, but what they were good at, they were pretty good at. And then they took a nosedive. They went higher with Monty Rice in the 3rd round and busted. And the wheels came off of what they were doing there. Now these are lower draft picks that they have there, and they can't go into the season feeling confident about. Well, Cedric Gray was a 4th, but James Williams a low pick. Chance Campbell always hurt. You can't count on any of these guys that are on the roster to be the second starting linebacker. So they need somebody. I suspect to be another draft pick or a low cost guy. Now, Murray's better coming forward, so this other guy's got to be better going backward. So who's the best coverage linebacker out there who's not going in the first 3 days? That's the guy I'd look to.
I would agree with you there as well. Sean O'Reilly says they should have just kept Ernest Jones.
Ernest Jones got, I think, about what was the contract? I can't remember. I think it's close to $10 million a year.
Yes.
And the whole reason that they traded Ernest Jones is because they knew he was going to warrant about $10 million a year, and they didn't think he was worth $10 million a year. I love Ernest Jones, but is he a $10 million a year player? I think you could argue that he is not. Now, I would attack $2 million onto what I think Ernest Jones is worth for the leadership value. So is he an $8 million a year linebacker worth $2 million a year more for the leadership? Maybe. I think they think he's a $6 million a year linebacker. And then maybe if they went by my add $2 million for the leadership, they would have gotten to $8 million, and then you're not that far off. Mm-hmm. But they did get a 4th for him, which is pretty damn good value for how they turned it. Now, what do they do with it?
Yeah, exactly. There is something to be said that Titans defense looked dramatically worse without him after that. Yeah, so I think that.
And the locker room was much better with him.
Yes, I would agree there. So
he wasn't there long. For a guy to have that much influence on the locker room and on the tone of the team in 6 games? Something like that. I mean, that's an impressive thing to do. That's a hard thing to do. And he did it. So I got a lot of respect for Ernest Jones. I really do.
Yeah, I do. I'm with you there. Ed Henry says essentially 3 new starters on the line with the Latham shift. They still need to address the right guard. Do you think with how lucrative this guard free agency class is that they look to the draft to probably supplement that? Or do you think that outside of a swing tackle and maybe some depth, they do need to go find a starting guard now?
Well, I mentioned that Pete Prisco said that the finances of the guard market were going to really be high. We haven't seen a guard move today. So maybe
outside
that says we see one.
The franchise tag for Trey Smith, which kind of,
Right. But we haven't seen a guard change teams. And so maybe that means that teams are rebuffing these early demands from guards, and the market will come back down to earth. I think it'd be far better if the Titans got themselves a veteran guard. My expectation was that they would do a lot in free agency in the offensive line market, because they thought the offensive line batch of free agents was not bad, and because they think the draft is not deep, and that they would do more addressing of edge in free agency and more addressing of offensive line here. So I would expect a veteran guard, and then I'd say, screw this time to gel. You got camp. Week one, I want to see an effective offensive line. Now, I understand week one's not going to be the same as week 8, but week one needs to be, acceptable offensive line play. I don't want to hear Brian Callahan talking 2 weeks into the season about how they need time on the offensive line. If they're bringing in two veterans here. Now, I don't think they think Cushenberry's going to be ready. So that could be an issue.
That's what I was going to move with. Trevor here says, will Cushenberry be ready to go at the start of the season, or do they need to find maybe potentially bringing back a guy like Daniel Brunskill to be that stopgap? It sounds like you're cautious on the idea that he'll be good to go for week 1 with the rest of the offensive line.
Yeah, I'm cautious on the idea that he'll be good to go, and I'm cautious on the idea that he'll be himself. It's kind of like the ACL thing, and I think it's that Dr. Chow that once described the ACL return as a shade, pulling up a shade as opposed to a light switch. There's not a moment. It's a gradual thing. And I think Achilles' return tends to be like that as well. So even if Cushenberry is back, and you hope he's in the lineup as soon as he can be, how long before he's himself, and is his 2025, just not as good as he can be in 2026? That's a sucky thing. That's a factor here. But I think there's going to be some kind of interior swing guy. I don't know if it's Brunskill or somebody outside who's got some more size than Brunskill, because we know how much Bill Callahan likes size, that can play guard and maybe start the season at center if they need him.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Bottom line, though, the Titans signed Dan Moore. Some other quarterbacks go off the board. And I think here in the comment section, someone said it best. Josh F. says the beggars can't be choosers, because there's plenty of holes to fill, and the Titans end up addressing one of their bigger needs, which is maybe slightly overpaying to fix their offensive line here. I think the bottom line, though, when it comes down to it, is that, as Richard Snyder says, week 1 through 4, they do have to click almost immediately, and this has to pay off, because to have this be one of the bigger moves that they most likely make here at the start of free agency, it has to pay off for sure. And I think that's where we will end it today. Sinkers Beverages, Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. Go check them out in the East Nashville, because they are some of the best to do it. We'll be back, at least I will be back, on Thursday with Nick Suss to talk about all the other moves that the Titans potentially make and everything that goes on around the NFL. Will the Titans address their quarterback needs through the free agency? If they don't, what does that mean for the NFL draft? All of that and more to come. PK, I know you have some work. Probably it's a busy week, so you certainly have some things going up at paulkuharsky.com, and then also a show on Thursday.
I'll have a follow-up piece on Dan Moore coming up, and obviously reaction analysis on anything and everything that they do as it happens. And so maybe a pod between now and Thursday, depending on what happens, but definitely Thursday, let's say 12:30 live from my spot in Berry Farms. So check that out, as well as all the other 440 excellent products along the way. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you joining us.
Yep. We'll see you later.